Hello there. Welcome to the third day of the 12 Days of Creator Mass 2019, where we go through the process of making some IMVU items Christmas themed using Blender 2.8 smudging. Well, it's 2.81 at the moment, but 2.80 should work fine as well. So, continuing on from where we left off yesterday, we've got two themes that we are hopefully going to cover today. So one of the things that let's bring up the item, create, so we did this Corsage, is that how you pronounce it? This wrist corsage, wrist ribbons. We did this wrist ribbon yesterday. One of the, disable that. And one of the things that we've been doing when we've been making these objects is, let me see if I can get closer to this without clipping. So one of the things that we do when we, oh, that's new. Never noticed that before. Oh. One of the things that we do when we make these types of items is we enable, oh, I've forgotten to switch on zoom it. There we go. We enable two-sided, and that basically does what it literally says on the tin. It makes the object double-sided, so the outside of the ribbon or the object also appears on the inside. So that then raises the question in terms of, what do you do if you don't want that to happen? So that's one thing that we're going to talk about, and then hopefully today, if we get time, we'll also talk about one of the other things that we found out yesterday as well is, so switch to config tab. So this is set up for the left wrist at the moment, and we can see that the ribbon is more or less properly situated around the avatar's wrist. But if we switch this to the right wrist, that's RT, enter, it gets offset a little bit and we end up with some clipping. So what we have to do, well, the question then becomes, is it possible to use the same item for multiple, well, left side? So if you make the object for the left side, can you also use it for the right side? And it would be the same for any of the legs or any other aspect of the avatar where you want to minimize the amount of work that you do by using the same mesh. Can we do that? So that's the other topic that we're going to take a look at if we get time today. So first things first then, we'll take a look at how we sort out the issue of two-sided. So Blender, and we shall open the bow. There is the bow. So in Blender, by default, it also draws things two-sided or double-sided in the same way that IMVU does. And it does it the same way IMVU does. And the clue to the solution is in what they actually do. So both Blender and IMVU are doing the same thing when double-sided or two-sided is enabled. They are literally duplicating the object, inverting the faces, and that then becomes the inside of the object. So when we disable two-sided in IMVU, we only get one side of the mesh being drawn, which is how the object was made. And the same thing in Blender. That's in our material properties settings, and then in settings, and it's backface culling. It's called backface culling in Blender. So we enable that, and we can see the mesh is only one-sided. So why would we want to do this? There are a couple of reasons, but the main one is it allows us to have where's my painting program? It allows us to, this is the texture that's applied to that mesh. So this is the texture that we can see, that's mapped to it. But we also may want to use a darker color on the inside, indicating that it is darker on the inside of the mesh, because obviously less light is getting inside there. So if we want to have two different textures assigned to the same mesh, we have to duplicate it and apply one texture to one mesh and the other texture to the other mesh. So in Blender, that means we have to make two materials. Now we can do this. What's the best way of doing this? Easiest way of doing this is... Right, so easiest way of doing this is to, let me just make a note of this, duplicate, invert, and then we make the duplicate material unique. Right, so what that means then is we have to select our object. So we've got our object made up. This would be the same for any mesh. So even if have we still got it? That's the bow. Yeah, so it would be the same for the bow tie. Or any other object, as it would be or is for the wrist bow. So we've got our object, select it, object menu, and we want to duplicate objects. We don't want duplicate linked this time, just to duplicate the object. So we're basically doing a copy paste. So select that, and that creates our duplicate. Press escape just to release that back to where it was spawned from. Now the duplicate is selected, which is convenient. So edit mode, we need to make sure that everything is selected. Zoom in a bit closer to this. So select everything, select all, and then what we want to do is invert the surfaces. So from the mesh menu, mesh, normals, and then we want to flip them. So mesh, normals, flip, and that's inverted that object, and it's a mirrored inversion. So that takes care of the duplication and the inversion of the object. So back into object mode. And we can see that this also avoids, so in edit mode, we get this weird stuff going on here. It's called Z fighting or Z fighting. It's where two surfaces, oh, and there's some down here as well. It's where two surfaces are coincidental and they're fighting for display on the screen. And because the renderer can't determine which one needs to be drawn on screen, they both compete with one another and flash in and out of being rendered. And that's just because it's displaying essentially both sides of the mesh at the same time. So edit object mode. So we've also duplicated the material, which we now need to make unique. So material properties. So it's got the same ribbon material assigned to it. That now means that there are two objects in the scene using this material. So that's indicated by that number. So to make this particular copy unique, we can click the button that says 2, and that makes it unique, which we can then rename. We'll name that 1. So if we click the first object, that's 0. Click the objects again, although this is a bit tricky in the way that the new version of Blender works. Let's use the outliner. So there are our two meshes. That's the outside and that's the inside. So we can click that, select it, and that's material number 1. So let's rename these as well. So object properties. So that's inside. No, that's outside. And the other one is inside. We'll join these together later, but so that's duplicate, invert, unique material. But we also need to switch to shading. And we've also got, so that's materials again. So we've got two objects using the same material that we've just sorted out. But that's also duplicated the number of what's called users for the texture. And we need to make that unique as well now. So we do the same thing again, click on the number, make sure we've got the right mesh. So we want inside. Click the number 2, that creates a new unique instance. that we can now load our inside texture to, which is dark. Open image, and there we have our darker image assigned to the inside, and it removes that other texture that was assigned. Let's just double check that. So purple ribbon dark, that's fine. That's fine. Okay. So basically what happens, what's been done here then, let's just go over that. So we've had the original, we duplicated that, made a copy, that's made a copy of the mesh, the material and the texture that's assigned to it. We've inverted that duplicate, we've made it unique and made it easy for us to identify. So it's now got a unique material, which we've renamed, and in doing so we've also then given it a unique instance for our texture, and that's allowed us, oh, this is a bit slow, that's allowed us to then assign a completely new image to that. So we could do another one actually, could assign, let's try the red one, make it easier to see. So you could put a different color completely on the inside. So whilst you wouldn't necessarily always need to do this, depending on what you're doing, it has the advantage of allowing for this, so that you can have a texture on one side and a different texture on the other side or the inside of this particular object. But one of the other advantages of doing this, we didn't do this yesterday, so let's just hide the outside ribbon. So using the outliner, we can show hide objects by clicking these little eye icons. So we can hide that. And the advantage of doing this also means, whoops, wrong one. We want Vertex paint, and the tools are in the sidebar tool, and there's our colors. Want to keep these grayscale, and then what we can do is tint the inside . Let's switch on wireframe. Where's wireframe? Viewport display. Now it's in objects. Viewport display, wireframe. There we are. There we can see what we're doing now. Vertex painting is a little tricky because you have to be able to fully access the vertex that the color or the tint is associated with. because you're actually painting the vertex, not the surface. But even then, it can still be a little finicky. So we can compare sides. So on the left, we've got the clean version, and on the right we've got the painted up version. So what this also allows us to do when we duplicate something is that we can assign different vertex color tinting. So there's a difference between mesh shading that goes on in the viewport of Blender and or in IMVU. So where this object is slightly darker, that's IMVU's rendering engine making the shading change relative to the object and its position in regards to the scene's lighting. So you can't do this if you use double-sided or two-sided. It would mean that whatever, I think we did it for the bow tie. See if we can get closer to this. Yes, so although it's not quite so obvious there, there is some vertex painting associated with that. But with two-sided enabled on a single-sided mesh, it means that your vertex colors appear on both sides of the mesh, on both the inside and the outside, where it might not look right. So doing two meshes, or using two meshes, works around that, because the vertex colors are only associated with the mesh that they are painted to. So we'll do this and then export and see what this looks like in IMVU. So as mentioned yesterday, we're using tones of grey rather than colours, because if you use colour, it interferes with the textures that someone might use as a derivable. So if you set this to be derivable and you use, what did we use? Blue. If you use blue shading, and they put this yellow texture on, or a yellow texture, it's likely that sections of the mesh would turn green because of the combination of the blue vertex color and the yellow, yellow of the texture. So if you use tones, grayscale tones, that tends to avoid that. Oh, and then there's the inside of the wrist. Let's hide the torso. Where's the body? That's the wrist, or the hand. Where is that? Oh, quick way to find something. If there's about 100 different items listed in the outliner. So if you want to find it, the object, specific object in the outliner, what you can do is select it in the 3D view, move the mouse over the outliner, and then press number pad delete. It'll jump to this selected item. Then you can just hide it. What we're doing? Oh, vertex painting. Right, so that'll do. Although it's a bit darker on this side. Whoops. Alright, so that'll do. Oh, and we lose the ability to see vertex painting in the views, which is unfortunate, but we know that that is vertex painted, so let's save that. File, save as, it's number 7. And then we can export that. So as it's an accessory, so as it's an accessory, select none. Don't want anything selected in the scene, and then file. Oh, hang on, we need to check something before we do that. So although we've duplicated this mesh outside, although we've duplicated the outside mesh, and it should copy the vertex group and the modifier that's assigned to it that attaches the mesh or the objects to the appropriate armature for it to be used in IMVU. So although it's done that, we need to double check. So that's the outside. Attachment route. Switch to edit mode. Select all. And just assign. Select the other one. Edit mode. Select all. And assign. Yeah, that's fine. So we can export this as it currently is, but it means the FBX file will include 2 meshes because these are separate. So what we can do, let's join the inside to the outside. So click, shift click. So the darker one is the active object, and then from the object menu we can join these together. So we've now got one object. We'll probably rename that back to let's save this as a different version before we export. So we've got a reference point to go back to if we need to. Save as. Right, so now we can export. Let's just double check. Pose mode. Press the R key. Yeah, that's fine. We want everything to move as the bones move. That seems to be okay. Right, so deselect. So select none. Export FBX. That's okay. Right, so this is an accessory. So for FBX, it's best to always deselect selected objects. Everything else is okay. That's okay. Geometry, apply modifiers, that's optional and can be left in place for most part. Armatures, always disable add leaf bones. And we can disable bake animations because we're not using any of that. Change the file name if you want, and then just, whoops, export. So that's exported that. So let's import that into IMVU. Create mode, new accessory, female. So that's the default avatar with the glasses. FBX import. Load FBX. That takes us to the Windows dialog where we can select the file number 8 and then open. That brings up the select skeleton root, and as always we want the one that starts root node, which will always be 2 bones 1 mesh. So select that. It'll give us our mesh. Oh, that was quick. So this is an accessory, so it's the female accessory. So the mesh ID for that is 2. If it were a male accessory item, it would be 0, and we would have loaded the, or derived from the male accessory. Apply scale 0.01. And just before we import, let's take a quick look at the materials. So for IMVU, there's a tutorial on this. Hang on, let me just bring it up. Alright, there's a tutorial on this. Just drop it into chat so it can be clicked later. IMVU material names and Blender 2.8 plus. The latter part isn't particularly relevant at this point, but material names. So material names in IMVU are defined by the numbers, not the names. So in this instance, it knows, because we've assigned 0 to the first material and 1 to the second, IMVU knows that those are 2 different materials, even though they are called the same thing, so ribbon. So you can use the same label or identifier for all your materials. So we could have, you know, half a dozen of these, and they could all be called ribbon, but so long as the numerical append is different, IMVU will recognize that they are different materials. So double check your materials that you have your numerical appends set up correctly. If it comes through in IMVU, IMVU will do its best to try and auto-correct, but if there are multiples, go back into Blender and double check that your material names are set up correctly for IMVU. Right, so import this. It'll give us these warnings. Scale difference between IMVU and Blender will generally always pull up this scale difference error, and then there's a message about the default material being replaced, which is fine. So import changes. apply changes, and it has appeared, but it's inside the avatar's head. Oh, and it's worked. Woo! So we need to go to config, and this is LF wrist. So let's zoom out a little bit. Whoops. Zoom out. Apply changes. And there is our bow, or corsage. And currently it's blinking at us because we have the two materials, and they are, well, one of them's two-sided, which is the default. So we have to disable that. Disable use blender because I'm not using that anyway. And that, where's it gone? There it is. And that fixes the problem. And we can also see if it's brought in the vertex colors. Go away. Vertex colors. Might be tricky to see because we can't get that close to these items. It looks like it has brought them in. That looks quite nice, even if I do say so myself. So there you go. And the thing is that this isn't any more expensive than what IMVU does if two-sided is enabled, because it is technically doing this to objects that are set as two-sided. As mentioned at the beginning, it is duplicating the mesh structure and inverting the faces in order for IMVU to draw the inside of something. So it's already doing that. So this doesn't add or take away any resources, or it's not particularly resource hungry. It doesn't cause any rendering problems per se, because that's what IMVU does when two-sided is enabled. So you might as well, if you're going to do two-sided, you might as well use it to some effect and do something like this, where we've got the inside of the bow different to the outside. And your customers will all say, how on earth has that been done? And they will marvel at your cleverness. And you will say it is a trick. Let's just check on the assets. That's okay, that's okay, that's okay. Yeah, so that's two-sided products. Let's save that. Save as Mass 2019 3. Let's call this two-faced. Nice. That works fine. So the next thing that we were going to look at is different body parts. So we can continue using this object. And as we saw, go away menu, as we saw, if we change this to RT wrist, it's out of sync. It clips. So that little area is where the ribbon intersects the arm or the wrist of the avatar. And unfortunately, that's because the avatars aren't exactly symmetrical. So there's slight differences between the left and the right side of the avatar. So the only way to do something that's universal is literally just to tweak the original so that it can be used on the opposite side of the mesh. So if we wanted this bow ribbon thingamajiggery to be used on the right side, what we want to do so let me just make a quick note. So we need to duplicate again so we get a copy, and we want to mirror. Then we'll want to possibly invert because the faces will be the wrong way round. Then we need to set up the armature, and that will mean changing the vertex group before we can then export. So let's do that. So as we're going to, let's focus on the object. Right. So the object is in place where it needs to be on the left-hand side, but it's probably not going to be on the right-hand side. But we want to do an exact mirror across the center of the avatar, which is that blue line that we can see. And the way that we can do that is to use the 3D cursor, which is this little red and white thing. This thing. We can use that as what's called a pivot point. And it's a point around which things can be. So if something's on this side, using the pivot point, we can pivot that object onto the opposite side using the cursor as a pivot point. So first thing we need to do is double check to make sure it's at the center of the grid, and at the moment it isn't. So yeah, so it's view. So we're in the sidebar again. So the shortcut key for that is the N key. So those of you that are familiar with Blender already will know about the N key, which opens view properties. It's now called sidebar. So click on view, and then we want 3D cursor. Change the locations to 0, 0, 0, and that drops the cursor down at the bottom there. So that's now dead center. So what we can do is the mesh is selected. We need to duplicate this, and that is from the object menu. Object menu. We're just doing a straight duplication, so this is a straight copy paste. So duplicate. That creates our duplicate. Press escape. Just reset. Now we need to set the pivot point. That's this thing at the top. At the moment, it's on median point. We want it to be the 3D cursor. So select that, and the widget, this thing, that should jump down to the cursor. Yep, there it goes. So it's down at the cursor now. It's still using the local transform orientation that we were using to adjust the bow previously. We can keep that in place, and hopefully that shouldn't affect what we're about to do. So select our duplicate, and then what we want to do is object mirror, and then this is the y-axis, I think. Whoops, no, it's not the y-axis, it's the x-axis. Mirror x. Yeah, so it's the x-axis, so that's jumped. Let's undo that, see if we can get rid of that. So it's using the 3D cursor as the pivot. Mirror. Let's move this over so that we can see it. That menu's rather large, gets in the way. So mirror X, and it pops over to the other side of the mesh, the avatar. So what we can do now is toggle the cursor back from 3D cursor to median point, and the widget should jump up to our bow, which it does. So we can now, let's go back into perspective mode, so view, there we go. So we can now adjust this using our widgets. Let's focus on that. And this is why some products don't work as you might expect them to when you buy them. It's because someone might have just done a duplication and flipped it over to the other side of the mesh without necessarily thinking about the position of the product in relation to the avatar. And that's why you sometimes see problems cropping up with some products that you buy. So we're in local orientation, which means if you didn't see the previous video, I suggest watching that. In local, it means that objects can be manipulated using the widgets relative to the object rather than a 3D view. So if you go to global, you can see that the widget reorientates itself, and it's doing that relative to the scene. So local makes it easier to position objects as we would expect them to be. Right, so that's that done, but we also now need to, so this will be, we want to go into UV editing because we've flipped, in mirroring the object, we've inverted the UV map. So we need to UV editing, so we can see it. So we've got two materials on one object. So we've got the yellow one that's visible at the moment. So we want to really just adjust the top one, the purple one. So I need to deselect, whoops, none. And in material properties, what we can do is use the materials or the material assignments to make selections within the mesh. So we want the purple one, so we select the material and then click the select button, and that will select everything that's associated with that particular material. Let's do a quick shift. There we go. That's what you'll find is that even though it's selected the material, you might have to click a surface so that, whoops, so Blender knows which element or which aspect of the mesh is the active element. Even though it's selected all the surfaces, you'd think it'd know that it needs to display the appropriate image, but it doesn't. So you often have to select an actual image, which is the Shift key, and just clicking a surface. And alternatively, what you could do is, let's deselect. So we don't want the yellow, but to make clicking the purple one easier, select the yellow, press the H key to hide it, and then all we've got is the purple that's left, so we can then select that, and we can make selections without accidentally picking up the yellow. So we want to, so that will be select all, mirror, will it be the y-axis? Yes. So there we go. That's just the y-axis. So that's flipped, corrected the inversion that's created because the object was mirrored. So unhide. Where's that gone? Oh, there it is. Show hide. Reveal hidden. You might want to if the stream is unstable, don't worry about it too much, because this is being recorded and it'll be uploaded to, it'll be mirrored up to Twitch, not Twitch, to YouTube. So it's being recorded locally and it'll be uploaded in, because it looks like the connection is quite unstable at the moment. Anyway, so continuing what we're going to do. Oh yes, so what we want to do as well also is, even though the inside texture is not, it isn't patterned, because that's been flipped. If someone were to put a texture on there that has some patterns or text on it, might want to hide that, select and invert that as well. So select all, mirror, y-axis, and it won't really do anything in terms of what we're seeing at the moment, but it will invert or correct the mirroring. Right, so with that done, let's unhide. Go back to layout. Select the mesh. Modifiers. And what we want to do here is clear. We need to clear the armature that's associated with the mesh at the moment, because it's still using the one that's on the left. We need the one that's on the right now. So click the X. That'll give us the what do they call it? Eyedropper. Click that, and then click on the armature that we want to use, which is right wrist. So click that, and it drops the armature into the object. And that now means this armature is controlling this mesh. So we can double check that. Select the armature, pose mode. Let's just do a quick test. That's the R key. Right click again to select the other bone, and that's perfect. So we're checking to see which bone controls the mesh and checking the vertex group to make sure that the entire object is associated with the bone and the armature. So exit pose mode, and we can save this before we export. So save as number 9. And then just export. So select none, file, export FBX. File name is 9, so change that. So settings, selected objects, deselect. That's okay. Geometry, apply modifiers, that's okay. Armature, that's disabled, so that's good. And animations, that's disabled, so that's good. And then export. So that has exported. So in IMVU, so create mode, drive new accessory. So there is the default. FBX import, load FBX, and this time it will give us 2, because we can, that's the advantage of using FBX. This scene, this project has 2 products in it. And they're exported with the FBX file. So when we import, we now have 2 options. Again, remember root node, 2 bones, 1 mesh, 2 bones, 1 mesh. So we need to double check that we're getting the right one, and we want the RT wrist, right wrist. So select, that's got our mesh ribbon, and it's showing that it is a duplicate, funnily enough. And then configure. Materials, they've come in okay. Mesh ID is number 2. Scale is 0.01. And then import. Yeah, so it's going to override the default material. Import changes. Apply changes. And it's inside the head again. There it is. That looks like it's inside out, so we need to double check. Oh, that's something we forgot to do maybe. So let's just double check that. So RT head, whoops, RT wrist I mean. Yep, it looks like we forgot to do something. So disable two-sided, apply changes. Uh-oh, we forgot to do something. Yep, so that's doing exactly what it should be doing, but we forgot to do something, and that is invert the faces. So we have to go back into Blender. It's the right side, and we'll see this when we do this. Object, we forgot to use apply because we mirrored the object. And watch what happens to the object. Let's just move it to one side so we can see it a bit better. Object, mirror, not mirror, apply, rotation and scale. So what mirroring's done is not only flipped the object to the opposite side of the avatar, it's also inverted the surfaces and the UV maps. So we have to correct all of this in order for it to appear properly in IMVU. So what we can do now is edit mode, select everything, and then mesh, normals again. So mesh, normals, flip, and that's flipped it the right way out. object mode, save the file, and then re-export. So select none, export FBX 9, that's still okay. That's alright. That's alright. That's alright. Bake animation, that's alright. So export FBX. So IMVU. Just create another project so that we can have something to compare with. New project, accessory, go. So glasses, FBX import, load FBX, number 9, right wrist, append import, so 0.01, mesh ID 2, materials are okay, then import, success. Apply changes. It's inside the head and it looks okay. So config RT wrist. Whoops. RT wrist. And there it is. And then finally disable. Double check. And there it is on the right hand side. And we don't have any clipping. Let's enable vertex colors. So we don't have, is it number 3? Yeah, it's number 3 that shows the clipping. So using the same object but on a different bone will typically clip. So in Blender or your 3D app, you'll have to set them up properly using the avatars so that they don't clip. And there is our Corsage. So we've got one on the right and oh, that's the one on the right again. Let's just flip that one over to the left. LF. So there it is on the left. There it is on the right. So save that. Save as. Two-face brackets RT. There we go. And then it's just a question of uploading. So do your product icons, get those sorted out, your profit margin, and upload. So, if you want to learn more about using Blender for this stuff, for making IMVU products, let me get the URL. Visit this page. There's a number of video tutorials, as well as all the other stuff that we've been doing on Twitch, but there's also the starter files. So the accessory starter file, clothing starter file, all the starter files for Blender 2.8 are on that page. So if you are watching this back in Twitch, the replay in Twitch, you'll get the chat link. But if not, just click the link that's below the video. So that's it for today. That's two topics covered. So what did we do? We made a duplicate, switched it over, I've lost my notes. I've lost my notes. Oh yes, so inside, outside, two different materials, taking advantage of the fact that, you know, people enable two-sided. And then different body parts, which is what we just did. So, yeah, source files will be available, so you can download those and play around with them. But that's it for today. So that was day 3 of the 12 days of Creator Mass 2019. So day 4 we'll do another, we'll continue the theme with bows, and we'll do another bow. So, yes. Thanks for watching and lurking, lurkers and watchers. And if the stream is not particularly brilliant, don't worry about it, because we'll be uploading a locally recorded version that's in all its HD gloriousness. So, with that squinty eye look from the avatar, we shall call it quits and see you on the next stream, which will be tomorrow, same time-ish. So, bye for now.